Our next two guests have, I kid you not, traveled all the way from Australia, all right? They have created a company in Australia that serves companies in Australia, including U.S. multinationals like Coca-Cola, like Unilever, News Corp, MTV, improving their businesses. Their business is effectively focused on making the impossible possible. They have the Impossible to Possible Institute. These guys are phenomenal. Again, they have come all the way from Australia, and you're about to get your socks knocked off. Dan Gregory and Kieran Flanagan, come on up.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Gregory.
And I'm Kieran Flanagan. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to clear something up because people often ask. We're business partners, not life partners. Although after 20 years of working together, it's kind of like a marriage.
What Kieran's getting at is we complete each other's sentences, she bosses me around and we don't have sex. Has anyone here been married for 20 years knows what I'm talking about? Okay, they're with me.
We also wanted to point out some of the differences between American idioms and Australian ones. Hardly surprising, you guys were settled by religious Puritans.
Whereas we were settled by convicts. So there's every chance we're going to cross a line today. It's just in our natures.
And the differences don't end there. I mean, we speak to American audiences a lot, and they can really lull you into a false sense of security.
See, one of the issues is we assume you speak English, which of course you don't. You speak American, which sounds almost exactly like English, but is in fact a completely different language.
For instance, you say trash can.
We say rubbish bin.
You say hood.
Whereas we pop the bonnet.
Baby's crying, you use a pacifier.
We put a dummy in its mouth.
Baby needs changing, you use a diaper.
We change their nappy.
You say cookie.
We say biscuit.
You say biscuit.
We say scone. It's confusing, right?
You say this is what a 46-year-old Australian man looks like.
Whereas we know this is what a 46-year-old Australian man really looks like. So I think we're on the same page here, right, ladies?
And you call these flip-flops.
Whereas we call these thongs. So you can imagine the trouble a young Australian finds himself in when he first moves to the United States and on a hot summer's day turns to his American colleagues and says, I can't wait to get home and slip into some thongs. So there's every chance we may confuse you today, we may shock, we may even offend, but trust us, that is not our intention. So if we do fail to cross the cultural divide this afternoon, we would like you all to yell out the word thongs, and we will retrace our steps and try and explain what we mean.
Actually, we should practice that. So I want you all to practice shouting out the word thongs. If I were to say, I love eating fairy floss, you would all shout out, thongs! Perfect, because fairy floss is what you guys call cotton candy.
So, what we want to talk to you about today is creative leadership. You know, what kind of leadership does it take to drive innovation? Because our assertion is that innovation is actually a leadership skill. It's about category leadership. It's about how do you define what your industry or your category is going to look like in 5 years' time. Now, this is the model of leadership we were promised when we began our careers some 20, 25 years ago. And you know what? I like this model of leadership. Me at the top, obedient minions beneath me.
Me too.
But you know what? That's not the model of leadership that showed up. We were recently doing an innovation consult for a military consortium, and we could tell you what we're working on, but then we would have to kill you. Now, a military consortium is usually a group of 20 or 30 ex-military men, and it's always just men. And as you can imagine, when a group of military guys get together in a room, there's a lot of posturing going on. A lot of who's the biggest, who's the toughest, that kind of thing. Fortunately, I watched a lot of Jean-Claude Van Damme movies as a kid, so I reckon I held my own. But as this posturing was going on, the door at the back of the room opened up, and this old guy in chinos and a polo shirt entered the room. And the posturing stopped, and the bragging stopped. And it was immediately obvious to us that a real leader had entered the room. So he said to the Special Forces guy we were talking to, who's that? And he said, that's Major General Jim Molan. He's a legend. Now, it turns out Jim was one of the commanders in the war in Iraq, not just the Australian contingent. He was in command of the Americans, the Canadians, the Poles, the Brits, and the Australians. And so we wanted to get a sense of what that kind of leadership took. How did he get such a disparate group of people from different nationalities, different military disciplines, different values, different religions, different cultures? How did he get them to work together as a cohesive whole? Now, luckily, it turns out Jim's a fan of the TV show we do back in Australia, so we had a fantastic conversation. And he's kind of this old school guy. He reminded me of my grandfather. He's like a real man. You know, Jim's the kind of guy they base those Chuck Norris facts on. You know, when Jim Molan does push-ups, he doesn't lift himself up, he pushes the world down. He's that guy. And we said to them, Jim, how did you get that group to work together? And he said, you know what, I led the most highly disciplined, the most well-resourced, the most well-trained workforce on the planet, and it was my honour to serve with them. And then he eyeballed me and he said, Dan, what kind of people do you command? And I said, creative people, Jim. And Jim Molan looked at me and he said, you poor bastard. Because Jim Molan knows if he ever gives an order, his people will snap to attention and say, sir, yes, sir. If I was ever to give my people anything resembling an order, they would tell me to go and do something to myself that might be a lot more enjoyable if another participant was involved. Who here knows what I'm talking about? You know what? I think that's the leadership we're all faced with today. You know, command and control is being replaced by commander's intent in the military. It's now, how do we create cultures of the willing, cultures of the voluntary, cultures of the enthusiastic? That's what creative leadership is about. And creative leadership requires an appetite for revolution, an appetite to change the way things have always been done. So what does that leadership look like? We're going to suggest that leadership requires the 4 stands that a revolutionary leader takes. What do you stand for? Number 1, what do you stand for? Number 2, who do you stand with? Number 3, what do you stand against? What's the change you want to see in the world? And number 4, how do you stand up as leaders? So we're going to talk to you a little bit about that today. So we'll start with what do you stand for? In other words, how do you build an identity-centric culture? Because all human behaviour, everything we do, is filtered through our sense of identity. Every decision we make is filtered through who we think we are and who we want to project to the world that we are.
It's also one of the reasons our Australian identities and your American identities are so powerful. And probably why you guys stubbornly refuse to adopt the metric system. I mean, come on, guys. It's based on multiples of 10. It's not that hard.
So identity drives all human behaviour. But let's just step back and have a look at the history of the behavioural sciences. Now, it really kicked off in the 1600s with Blaise Pascal and decision theory. And Pascal's theory was that human beings look at all of their available options, then they weigh up the pros and cons, and then people make the most logical decision possible. How's that working for you? Of course, that's not what people do at all. And then people like Daniel Goleman came along and said, no, it's not just about intellectual intelligence, it's also about emotional intelligence. EQ is just as important as IQ. And of course, he's right. Every decision we make is filtered through how that decision will ultimately make us feel. Now, of course, we post-rationalise a lot of our emotional decisions, don't we? There's a lot of men in the advertising industry driving around in Porsches that can tell you all about Porsche's racing heritage, German engineering and aerodynamics, but all we're really interested in is some special hugs from women half our age. But we like to post-rationalise that very emotional decision. And then people started wondering, well, hang on, what's the most important question we can ask? If we want to be influential, if we want to be persuasive, if we want to be engaging, what's the most important question we can be asking ourselves? And people like Simon Sinek came along and said, well, it's all about why. Why drives how, which determines what. Viktor Frankl said exactly the same thing 50 years earlier in Man's Search for Meaning. With a big enough why, you can achieve any what. And of course, they're right. The problem with why is it's often temporary. Anyone who's ever been on a diet knows exactly what I'm talking about. You know, if you've got a big enough why, maybe a school reunion or a wedding or a hot date, you can lose the weight, right? You get on the treadmill, you eat nothing but lettuce, and you look fabulous. But then 6 months goes by and the why disappears, and all of a sudden you're back sitting on your sofa, in your sweatpants, watching Oprah and eating chicken out of a bucket. Because your identity is more powerful than discipline and motivation. You know, we think rather than starting with why, we should be starting with who. Who do you help your people to be? Who do you help your customers to be? Start with who. In fact, this is what drives innovation success. Oded Schenker at The Ohio State University did a study, and what he found was 97.8% of the value in innovation goes to the imitator, not the innovator. And in fact, the determinant in success was not if they had the idea, but how engaging they made the idea. Did they wrap the idea up in an identity that was compelling, that was sticky? That's what drove innovation success. So how do we understand our identity? Well, one of the most critical things we need to be asking ourselves is, what is the business that we're really in? We were recently doing some work with some optometrists, and we said to them, can anyone here tell us what business you're in? And they all said,
we're eye doctors, guys. We're in medical services.
and we said, terrific, fantastic. So where's the money? Where do you make the margin? Do you make the money in the back room going, blurry, less blurry, blurry, less, 5 years at college to do that, blurry, less blurry. And they said, well, no, the consults cover the costs. We actually make all of our real money selling frames. And we said, oh, that's interesting. So you're not medical services, you're on retail fashion. And they just looked at us like college education, and these guys tell us we work at the Gap. But we said to them, how have you decorated your store? Is your store decorated to look like a fashion boutique that's inviting and I want to go in, spend some time browsing, trying stuff on? Or have you decorated it to look like a medical clinic that's intimidating and no one wants to go inside unless they have to? How have you arranged your frames in store? Are they arranged by face shape so I know it's going to make me look good? Or are they arranged by season so I know it's going to make me look fashionable? Or are they arranged generically by brand? And where do you spend your training budget? Do you spend your training budget on yourself so you can do the blurry, less blurry thing more efficiently? Or is it spent on the 19-year-old who's sitting up front updating her Facebook status when she's your sales department, the source of all your profit? And of course, they spend all their time, money, and focus on the wrong things. We all do, because we don't understand the business that we're really in. And understanding the business that we're really in is what should be driving our innovation. Because we need to be innovating through business goals, not just developing new products and new services. So we need to understand what we stand for.
The second thing we need to think about is, who do we stand with? And standing with our customers, our colleagues, and our companies means working together and raising our WEQ, or our collaborative intelligence. Not to be nice, but to be better. And being better, raising our WEQ, starts with moving beyond tolerance. So do this little experiment with me. Turn to the person next to you and say, I tolerate you so much. Go on. Okay. Hands up. Who in the room just felt like they received a compliment? Right? Nobody. Because here's the thing. Tolerance is a really bad idea. Tolerance is a bad word. Tolerance sucks. Tolerance means I don't like you, I don't respect you, I don't think you bring anything to the table, but I put up with you because if I don't, HR are going to make me do a course. So we need to move beyond tolerance. We need to move to raise our WEQ. You know, the Channel Tunnel, the tunnel that connects France and England, is one of my favourite examples of the power of collaboration. It's one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. It has the longest undersea distance of any tunnel on Earth at approximately 25 miles, with an average under the seabed depth of 31 miles. It cost over £9 billion to build, which is approximately 14 billion US dollars. But none of that is what makes it revolutionary. None of that's what makes it innovative. What makes it extraordinary is it was a collaboration between the English and the French. 2 cultures not exactly famous for getting along. I mean, the English still turn up to soccer games against the French and chant, Agincourt, Agincourt, Agincourt. That's a chant about a battle they won in 1415. Talk about holding a grudge. I also love it because I kind of like to imagine the Germans watching the English building the tunnel, thinking, the English always visit tunnels. The other thing that collaboration does is makes us all smarter. In fact, MIT did a study and they took a homogenous group of only men and they added a single woman to it. And guess what? The collective IQ of the group went up. No surprise, right, ladies? Yeah. And they added another woman to the group, and guess what? What do you think happened? It went up again. The collective IQ of the group went up again. Imagine. In fact, it kept going up. The group kept getting smarter. Until the homogeny balanced tipped back the other way and diversity disappeared. Now, it wasn't that the women made the group smarter, although we totally do. It was the fact that diversity, that different points of view, that different ways of thinking makes us smarter. So we need to know who it is we stand with.
Third thing we need to do is understand, what do we stand against? How do we challenge the status quo? You know, Commander Mike talked about this morning. You know, how do we make it okay for people to challenge the process? How do we make it okay for people to bring new ideas to the table? Because usually we don't do that very well. Usually we shut down people's creativity. In fact, at some point in our lives, usually in childhood, we seem to decide that we either are creative or that we're not. Or rather, someone decides for us and we decide to believe them. We found a website that we think illustrates this both beautifully and bluntly. It's called IamBetterThanYourKids.com. And this guy posts real children's artwork, like this fire engine by Jason, age 6. And then he critiques it mercilessly. Now, I reckon that's a pretty good fire engine for a 6-year-old.
Me too.
This is the review that it got. I've never seen a fire engine that needed to be shaved. I would rather be burned to death than saved by this hairy piece of crap. Now, clearly that's over the top. But when you're a kid, that's what criticism sounds like. Here's the thing, it doesn't sound any better to an adult. It doesn't sound any better to your teen. So often we shut down people's creativity in its infancy. And when you shut down one person's idea, you shut down the entire team because the story spreads. This isn't a culture where you bring new ideas to the table. This isn't a culture where you challenge the process. We need to make it okay for people to challenge and to drive the change they want to see. So what do I stand against? You know, one of the things I do when I'm not speaking to audiences like yourselves, and Kieran and I aren't running our own business, is I'm a director on the board of White Ribbon, which is the global campaign to end violence against women. You know, I got in... Thank you. You know, I got involved with White Ribbon for a number of reasons. You know, Marlene was talking this morning about this unconscious bias, but you know what? I think men also have an unconscious privilege. You know, when I walk home at night, through a park at sunset, I'm not looking over my shoulder every few steps. I'm not listening for how close the footsteps are behind me. You know, that's a privilege that I enjoy as a man. But it's a privilege I think all of us should be able to enjoy. I got involved with White Ribbon for 2 reasons. The first reason was because of a poster I saw in a marketing textbook when I was a 19-year-old university student. Simple but confronting headline. It simply reads, 1 in 4 women will be raped in her lifetime. Will it be your mother, your sister, your daughter, or your wife? Absolutely floored me. From that moment on, my little sister never had to worry about a ride home, no matter what time of night it was. My then girlfriend always found me outside her college classes at night to take her home, and I still walk Kieran to her car every night after work. Not because I'm a nice guy.
He's really not.
Not because I'm a nice guy, but because they made women's safety a man's issue. They made women's safety my issue. It's what we were talking about this morning. Until it's our issue, change doesn't happen. That was the first reason I got involved. The second reason I got involved is this little person, my goddaughter Darcy.
You mean my daughter?
It's not all about you, Kieran. It's my story, my goddaughter. I don't have any children, so she's really special to me. She's such a clever little girl. You know, she's wicked smart. I mean, I'd love her if she was stupid, but I'll be honest, I'd love her less. Is that wrong? Kieran and I were recently in Kuala Lumpur doing some work with universities in Asia. And Kieran and her husband Gary decided to go out and do some shopping, so Darcy and I had breakfast together in the hotel. And she's sitting across the table from me and she says, Dan, I am 4 years of age, but very soon I'll be 5, then 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, and it will go past very quickly. And I said, well, I hope it doesn't go past too quickly, Darcy. And she said, why? And I said, well, what if you grow up so much that you don't need your godfather anymore? And she reached her little hand across the table, put it on top of mine and said, Dan, we will always need each other. I picked up the phone, I called Kieran, I said, dude, you need a bigger place because someone's getting a pony. But what I'm standing against defines me as much as what I stand for, and that's what I'm standing against.
And you know, I stand against the lack of humanity in business. You know, it kills me, the lack of humanity. And one of the things I think we need to do if we want to challenge the status quo It's to challenge the language that we use to make it more human. You know, we were recently doing some work with the United Nations in Singapore, and we were helping them to develop strategies to fight human trafficking in the region. And one of the most important things that we did was to change the language they used to talk about the issue, to make it less fluffy, to make it more personal, to make it more human. I mean, think about it. Human trafficking sounds less confronting than slavery, doesn't it? Yeah, right? It's softer, it's less personal, it doesn't hurt as much. And Singapore's sex industry kind of sounds legitimate, right? After all, it's an industry. It sounds like something that would be good for the economy. You almost expect them to pay taxes. It certainly sounds less criminal than when we call it organised kidnapping and rape, which is what it actually is. So we changed the language they used to talk about the issue, to make it more personal, to make it more human, to challenge the status quo. But, you know, we do the same thing in business every single day, don't we? Use less human language. I mean, we call our people capital, which literally means head of cattle. Moo. And then there's the jargon. You know, you find copious quantities of it in businesses all over the place. It's the kind of stuff that sounds like it should be delivered by a smiling 1960s air hostess. We need to optimise our collateral to facilitate the corporate journey and streamline our onboarding process so all employees can live the corporate values, walk the corporate path and embody the company ethos. That way we'll have the bandwidth to leverage our supplier pipeline and create enough synergy so that going forward we can ideate some blue sky thinking and incentivise our brand evangelists with a holistic approach and a bespoke solution. All by COP. That's close of play, because remember, we're all having such fun, aren't we? If we want to challenge the status quo, we've got to challenge our language and make it more human. And the last thing we need to do is to stand up. You know, and standing up means taking action. It means taking action that creates stories that people will want to share on our behalf. We just need to be sure that we're telling the right kind of stories that come from the right kind of actions. And we want to give you a few examples to illustrate this. This is a young girl named Phoebe Kleban. Now, Phoebe was just 10 years old when she took her first flight by herself from San Francisco to her summer camp in Grand Rapids. Now, she has to make a stopover and change planes in Chicago. But don't worry, her mum and dad pay United Airlines a special fee to have a chaperone meet Phoebe and see her safely to her connecting flight. At San Francisco Airport, Phoebe's parents kiss her goodbye, tell her to have a wonderful time and stay and make sure the plane takes off safely. Hours later, they receive a call from summer camp. Phoebe hasn't arrived. Her mum immediately calls United, tells them what's happened, only to be put on hold for 40 minutes. Now keep in mind, these are no ordinary minutes, right? These are parents in a panic minutes. Those are like dog years. Yeah, they're much longer than normal minutes. Every parent knows that time is relative when it comes to kids. And a child on their own, in their room, not making any noise for 3 minutes, is the equivalent of having Aerosmith in a hotel room for a month. Eventually, she's taken off hold, only to be told, we can confirm, that the chaperone failed to arrive, and as a result, Phoebe did not make her flight. We have no idea where she actually is, but don't worry, she's probably fine. Now, is probably the word you'd use to the panicked parent of a 10-year-old that your company had lost? Probably not, right? Time to escalate things. Luckily, Dad's a premier United frequent flyer, so he calls a special line for their most important guests, and he gets put on hold for 15 minutes. Okay, so Aerosmith have decided to extend their stay. Eventually, he gets through to Chicago Airport, and he speaks to a woman from United. And he begs her, please, can you go to the gate and see if my little girl is okay? And she says, I can't help you. My shift is about to end. I wish I was making that up. The good news is they do eventually find Phoebe, and she does eventually make it to summer camp. But United show no empathy. They offer no apology. At no point do they stand up and show their humanity. I mean, forget losing your luggage. United lost a 10-year-old. Contrast that with the story of Panera Bread. 21-year-old student Brandon Cook goes to visit his grandmother in hospital. She's dying of cancer. And they both know there's not much time left. She tells him she wishes she could have one last bowl of Panera's famous clam chowder. So Brandon calls Panera only to find out they make the chowder on Fridays, and it's Tuesday. But Suzanne from Panera is so moved by Brandon's story that she says, don't worry, we'll make up a special batch of the chowder, especially for your grandmother, and to pop by later that day. When Brandon goes to collect it, it's beautifully wrapped with a box of cookies. This, as it turns out, is the last meal his grandmother ever has. Now, I'm not saying it killed her. It just happened to turn out that way. Brandon Facebooks and blogs about his experience, and social media and the actual media pick up the story. And they call Suzanne at Panera to ask her why she did it. And she says, anyone at Panera would have done exactly the same thing. I just happened to be the one who answered the phone that day. Wow, right? Wow. That is a story worth sharing.
The thing about stories are they're the most basic building block of human communication. We have always used stories as a way of making our vision and mission and values tangible and portable and shareable. You know, our capacity to drive narrative, as Adam said this morning, the two languages of leadership are numbers and narrative. Our capacity to drive narrative is critically important. We'll finish with one story about a company we launched in Australia. Now, Nando's is a fast food chain in Australia. They sell chicken. And at the time they came to us, they had one restaurant in Melbourne and one restaurant in Sydney, and that was it. But they were ambitious, and they came to us and they said, guys, we want to be famous. And we said, excellent. How much money have you got? And they said, $5,000. And we said, less excellent. But we were young and naive, and we thought we'd have a go. Now, because they didn't have a lot of money, we knew that we'd need to create stories that could leverage their brand up, that could inform their culture, that could get their customers engaged. Now, at the time, there was a politician in Australia called Pauline Hanson, who was a bit of a racist. She was running on an anti-immigration policy. She said Australia is just for Australians. And we didn't think that was something we could support. So we made one poster with that $5,000. We put it up across the road from Pauline's electoral office, about an 11.5-hour drive from the nearest Nando's restaurant. We had a picture of a brown chicken, a white chicken, and a black chicken with the headline, "We're all the same on the inside, Pauline." This one $5,000 poster made national television news, was the front page of newspapers all around the country and the subject of talkback radio for a week. Nando's were thrilled. Overnight, they were famous. They said, wow, if you can do that with $5,000, do you reckon we can do a television ad with $10,000? And again, young and naive, we thought we'd have a go. Now, that $10,000 actually included the media spend. So the only place we could afford to run the ad was after midnight. So we made a commercial that was deliberately designed to look cheap and appropriate to the time slot. And this is the ad that we made. Have we got sound? We'll try that again.
Why not spoil yourself tonight? We're very eager to please. Prefer something a little exotic? Insatiable? Have both of us. For the hottest chickens, call Nando's.
Okay. So a little bit of background on this ad. When we went to shoot this commercial, we had to find some chicken-sized lingerie. No easy task. So Kieran and I went to Sydney's most famous sex shop, the Tool Shed, to see what we could find. Now, just to set the scene, at the time, Kieran was a cute, blonde, bubbly 21-year-old.
What are you saying, Dan?
Time is no one's friend, Kieran. Kieran was a cute, blonde, bubbly 21-year-old, and she has a voice that's a mixture of innocence and enthusiasm. So Kieran bounds up to the counter of the tool shed and says, "We'd like to buy a leather harness, please." The guy behind the counter looks at me as if to say, "Well done you, mate." Then Kieran adds, "But it's got to be small enough to fit on a chicken." At this point, everyone in the tool shed looks at Kieran and I like we've taken things to a level they never imagined possible. Kieran, of course, realises what she says. He says, no, it's not a live one, it's a dead one." Much better. The point is, we were able to build a brand, build a culture, build a set of values, build a mission, and make it tangible through the use of stories. So we want to leave you with 4 questions. What is it that you stand for?
Who do you stand with?
What is it that you stand against?
And how are you, and you, and you, how are we going to stand up?
Make the stand you take something that matters. Thank you very much.
Thanks.